Welcome back to Shadow to Soul. In this podcast, I share real experiences of regression therapy, my own and those of others, to explore how emotional memory shapes our lives, our behavior, and our bodies. In the previous episodes, I shared my lived experiences with regression therapy, how healing unfolded for me, and how it reshaped the way I understand trauma, energy, and behavior. They focused on resolving my present-day concerns, both emotional and medical, through resolving my inner children and triggered past lives. This episode marks a shift. It is about what began to happen when enough internal healing had taken place. I've always had a strong gut instinct. I can sense when something is misaligned. I pick up on insincerity very quickly, and I can feel when a space carries tension. That instinct has always functioned as my internal alarm system. What changed during this period was its depth and specificity. Instead of simply sensing that something was wrong, I began to understand what was wrong. Alongside that clarity, imagery began to accompany that perception. When I sensed something, I could see it. To protect the privacy of the people concerned and for ease of sharing these following stories, I've changed the names and the particulars of the people concerned. My very first time experiencing this shift involved a 16-year-old girl called Nisha and a 7-year-old called Ella, who I hold very dear in my life. They met for the first time at a social engagement, and I witnessed multiple interactions between the two over the 2-week period. Nisha was struggling emotionally. She felt insecure and displaced within her own life, and Ella received a lot of love and attention. And that attention towards Ella appeared to activate jealousy and emotional heaviness in Nisha. About 2 weeks after this socializing period, something completely unwarranted happened. I was at home, not doing anything in particular, and suddenly my mind's eye was flooded with images. It was like a movie playing, and I couldn't stop it. I saw the emotions move from Nisha to Ella like waves of black smoke. The emotions were depicted on Nisha's face like over-exaggerated facial expressions. I could see where these emotions were getting stuck on Ella, and I saw Ella's own energy leave her and get stuck on Nisha. This imagery, this movie played continuously in my mind. I experienced the emotions distinctly. I could feel their quality and direction, but it was from a detached perspective. I knew those emotions weren't mine. The difficulty for me was the persistence of these images. I could not switch them off, and more than that, I felt the damage that they were causing little Ella. I was almost in tears. I called Kinneri in panic and described what I was seeing. She responded calmly and told me it was okay. This was my intuition expanding. Once I settled, I assessed what to do. I allowed my intuition to guide me. Ella was susceptible to absorbing emotional weight that didn't belong to her because in her own perception, she didn't feel secure in the love she received in her life. There was already a vulnerability present. Nisha, in her own life, felt unloved, and truly displaced. She perceived that Ella received the love and attention that she longed for. In her internal world, Ella appeared to be fortunate. The underlying emotions in both girls resonated. This resonance creates the opening for the energetic transfer. Nisha was not acting out of cruelty. She was in pain. She felt unloved in her own life, and that pain sought expression. As I watched this unfold and I understood the depth of what was happening, another understanding emerged. If I could see how the energy exchange had happened, I could intervene to restore balance. In this instance, I would be acting as a stabilizing surrogate for Ella. At this stage, I didn't feel inclined to ask Ella's mom for permission. She's someone I'm very close to, and I knew she trusted me, but I knew how unusual this would sound if I tried to explain it verbally. Secondly, I also recognized that there was a possibility that absolutely nothing observable was happening. The imagery persisted, and the emotions were constantly present in my awareness. I continued to feel the damage that Ella had experienced. I decided to try and intervene and restore balance, but I didn't want to do it on my own. I went to see Kinnari for assistance. When I sat down in the chair and started talking to Kinnari, the images changed. This time, they were about someone that she knew, but I didn't want to say anything. So as I was talking to her, I hesitated. I felt self-conscious, and I didn't want to sound presumptuous or overstep by sharing what I was seeing about this person that she knew. Kinnari noticed the pause and asked me what was going on. I told her I was seeing something connected to Raj. She responded simply, saying she trusted me and to tell her what I was seeing. With her permission and her voicing her trust, the imagery came quick, it became clearer, and I started describing in detail what I was seeing. I could see Raj standing on a bridge. It was raining, it was dark, and I felt his anxiety, his fear. I was also able to discern that what I was seeing wasn't present day. It felt like a triggered past life. Kinnari said that she would speak to Raj without sharing anything that I had described so as to not influence him. After that, I closed my eyes and focused on the two girls. And immediately, I was in a trance, and the whole scenario was very clear in my mind. I was able to return Nisha's energy back to her, get back Ella's energy from Nisha, and restore balance. I felt the energetic shift in Ella as she returned what didn't belong to her and got back her own vitality. With the comfort of having Kinnari there, I trusted my instinct and did what my intuition was guiding me to do. It felt very natural. It felt like I'd always known what to do. That session marked a shift. Until that point, I had primarily been the client on a healing journey. After that, there was an emerging role. I started becoming a healer and a guide. After a couple of days, I called Ella's mom to ask about her, to ask how she was. I wanted to understand whether what I had perceived corresponded to anything observable. I didn't initially mention anything of what I'd seen. Her mom told me that since the previous day, Ella had been completely fine. However, immediately after the social engagement period, she had been withdrawn and fatigued. Her school had expressed concern over her subdued behavior, which was very out of character for her. 2 days before this phone call, her grandfather had picked her up from school. She's usually full of energy and very eager to share stories of her day. On that afternoon, she was so low in energy that she fell asleep shortly after getting to her grandpa's house. He was concerned enough to call her mom to ask if anything had happened. The timeline aligned. The period of withdrawal corresponded to what I had observed, and the improvement aligned with when I'd worked to restore the balance. At that point, I shared with Ella's mom what I had observed and done. She told me that she had already sensed the jealousy from Nisha towards Ella. She had noticed behavior that felt competitive, which she found slightly odd given the age difference between the girls. Separately, Kinnari spoke with Raj. Without being told anything I had described, she took Raj through a regression session, and he recalled being on a bridge, in the rain, in the dark, feeling really fearful, feeling frightened. This was a second confirmation for me. This showed me that my perception had shifted from general instinct to specific awareness. After that, similar experiences began to occur frequently. My perception became more structured and easier to manage. After a few months of this, in one particular case, a colleague reached out to me asking whether I'd be willing to support a young man who was experiencing severe anxiety. He was in his mid to late 20s, and his anxiety was so severe, he was unable to sleep alone at night. When I did work like this, I would only agree on 2 conditions. One, that I had permission, and the second was that I remained anonymous. The therapist would simply refer to me as a colleague. When I was shown his photograph, an impression surfaced clearly almost immediately. He had witnessed someone jump from a building. There was a sense that his system had compartmentalized that memory. He had not been able to process that incident, and subsequently the fear that he felt in that moment hadn't been resolved. The protective mechanism that had kept that memory contained was also preventing resolution. I relayed the direction to his therapist. Through careful, non-leading questions within a formal session, the memory emerged. He was then able to process consciously what he had witnessed and release the associated fear that had remained unresolved. Following that session, his therapist received a message from him that they forwarded on to me, saying that the fear and anxiety had gone and that he began sleeping independently again. What unfolded during this time for me felt like refinement. As unresolved emotional material cleared through regression therapy sessions, my internal landscape became steadier. There was more coherence in my thoughts, more regulation in my body, and less fragmentation in my responses. When the mind and nervous system are not constantly processing unresolved emotions, perception sharpens naturally. Awareness becomes clearer and cleaner. Intuition becomes easier to recognize and trust. The inner voice grows stronger, when it's not competing with noise. What I came to understand is intuition expands in proportion with integration. With all those lost parts of me integrating back into my consciousness, my perception expanded. As we resolve what weighs us down, we free up cognitive and emotional capacity. That capacity becomes available for discernment, guidance, and insight. Another realization during this period was about direction. Our path evolves as we evolve. When we are present in the journey, the destination continues to form in real time. The destination should reflect who you are in that moment. As you grow, the direction adjusts. And as you integrate, that path refines. As this shift unfolded, I found myself helping people quietly, always anonymously if through another person. With each person I supported, there was reinforcement that energy work influences lived experiences in tangible ways. When all of this started, I questioned if it was real, but after months of doing it, I had no doubt. My default orientation has always been toward science, assessment, evidence, structure. And that remained my first reference point. Whenever I was asked to help, whenever possible, I would always look for a medical explanation first. However, in all of the situations that I was approached about, there was no medical framework that accounted for what was happening. No clinical diagnosis, no measurable accountability. There was no formal explanation. And in those instances, energy work became the only available lens. So I trusted it. And it wasn't blind trust, because it consistently produced shifts when other routes had stalled. 2 months before the COVID pandemic hit, I had opened my optometry practice. During the first 2 years, I noticed a pattern. People would come in for eye care, but more often than not, the conversation would expand. They would share personal experiences, emotional difficulties, patterns they couldn't quite understand. I found myself intuitively guiding them through what were essentially hypnotherapeutic conversations and regression sessions. At the time, I had not formally trained as a therapist, yet the sessions unfolded naturally. They were focused, structured, and productive. People left lighter, clearer, different. There came a point when I recognized the need for boundaries. If I was in clinic, I needed to practice optometry. So I stopped all non-optometry related sessions in that setting. But that clarified something for me. If this work was emerging consistently, without effort, and I was intuitively able to help people, I wanted to learn more. I wanted structure. I wanted official formal training. And I wanted a qualification. That led me to formally enroll with ECHA for regression therapy training. The path did not feel like a sharp turn. It felt like alignment. The destination reflected who I had become. With this intuitive expansion came responsibility. People began to lean on that and trust it almost blindly. I established internal guidelines. I would always act with permission. That was a non-negotiable for me. It didn't matter who asked me to help their loved ones. if their loved ones did not want the help or weren't even aware of this, I would decline. I always maintain my boundaries, and at this point, I worked on myself in terms of my grounding, in terms of my own alignment, to ensure that I never projected onto anyone else. Perception without discipline can distort, but perception with respect, with discipline, serves. Up until this point, healing had been about me. Regression therapy deepened my connection with myself. It strengthened my awareness, sharpened my perception, and brought coherence to parts of me that had previously felt fragmented. That internal shift began to influence how I showed up externally. I was still a practicing optometrist. For me, there was no division between science and intuition. The scientist in me provided structure, discipline, and clinical reasoning. The intuitive aspect of me provided direction and discernment. Both operated together. Intuition had always been present in my work as an optometrist, even before I had started regression therapy. While working in the UK, long before I moved to Kenya, I had a young high myope call my clinic near the end of the workday, requesting for an appointment. He had been experiencing headaches and felt his prescription had changed, causing these headaches. He was happy to come the next day, but if there wasn't availability, he would have liked to be seen on that day. As it was nearing closing time, my staff checked in with me before booking him in. I felt strongly that he needed to be seen, so I asked her to tell him to come in as soon as he could. His prescription had not changed, and what he had mentioned over the phone was that his headaches had persisted and escalated in severity over the course of the week. He found no comfort in medication or sleep. Nothing worked to relieve the pain. After examining him, I directed him to go straight to the hospital. He was admitted immediately for a brain clot. He wasn't allowed to leave the hospital. He actually ended up staying in hospital for an entire month. He wasn't allowed to work. He wasn't allowed to be exposed to anything that could cause him stress. He wasn't allowed to watch TV. He got there in the nick of time. In another case, an elderly man came in for a routine eye exam, and on taking his history, he mentioned a persistent watery eye. He was under the eye hospital under the care of an ophthalmologist and was being treated for dry eyes. He mentioned that the eye was still persistently watery. During his retinal examination, I noticed a dark spot or patch right at the peripheral edge of his retina. It was difficult to maintain a continuous view of it, so I asked a colleague to have a look as well, just for a second opinion. She couldn't see anything at all. I had my doubt. I wanted to get a better look, so I dilated his pupils and checked again. Once again, I thought I saw the same thing. And again, I asked my colleague to have a look in case she saw the same thing. And once more, she couldn't see anything. I told him that because it's the same eye that is persistently watering despite a year of treatment, I wanted it to get checked again. I was going to send a letter directly to the hospital, and because I was sending it as an emergency referral, he would be seen by a different ophthalmologist. 3 months later, he came back. So when I approached him to ask if I could help at all, he said he was there to thank me. He said that a 5 centimeter malignant tumor was found in his eye. and the ophthalmologist was surprised that it got picked up in a routine optometrist-led eye exam. When I pulled out his record, on the referral letter, I had faxed to the hospital. I stated on there that I wanted to rule out a malignant tumor in his left eye immediately. That referral letter and the words on that were completely intuition-led. After regression therapy within the optometry setting, something refined. A patient came in to purchase glasses, and I would usually take the prescription they bring in with them if they were confident in it. In this case, I insisted on doing another eye exam. Her history appeared straightforward, there was no red flags, and when I went to do the retinal exam, I noticed some discrepancy in the blood vessels. So I asked her again if she had any history of high blood pressure. And at this point she said she did, but it was being managed through exercise and natural methods. Instinctively though, I knew that her blood pressure was high, so I asked her to go see her doctor. Later that afternoon, she called me after having seen her doctor, and she asked me what I had suspected her blood pressure to be. I told her around 165, and she was shocked. Her blood pressure was 163. Her doctor informed her that she had arrived just in time. What changed through regression wasn't the presence of intuition. It was the depth and clarity. There was pinpoint refinement within my intuition. Healing reduced the internal interference. With greater internal coherence, my perception sharpened. Science and intuition for me were never opposing forces. Science provided the structure, while intuition provided the direction. Together, they strengthened discernment. At this stage, I was no longer someone resolving my own trauma. I had fully stepped into guiding others, grounded in science, informed by my perception, and anchored in responsibility. The destination reflected who I had become, and as I continued to evolve, so did my path. In the next episode, I'll share a regression session that expanded my understanding of identity and memory in a way that shifted how I see both past and present. If this conversation resonated with you, continue the journey with me. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss what comes next. If you found value here, please take a moment to rate the podcast. It helps others discover these conversations. Until next time, from shadow to soul.